Dobro. History. Archive.
Back in December 1952, something absolutely terrifying descended on London. A silent killer. For 5 straight days, it held the city of 8 million people in its grip, turning the very air they breathed into a weapon. Now, this isn't just a story about some bad weather. This is a forensic investigation into a catastrophe. We're going to perform an autopsy, if you will, on how a city was poisoned by its own progress. Let's dig in. First things first, you have to forget everything you think you know about London fog. We are not talking about that mysterious, moody haze you see in a Sherlock Holmes movie. No, this was something else entirely, something malignant. This was an industrial nightmare come to life, a chemical fog that you could taste, that you could feel. And it was about to bring one of the world's greatest cities to its knees. And this is what it led to. 12,000. Just let that number sink in for a second. That's the modern scientific estimate of how many people were killed by the Great Smog, a death toll that rivals a military campaign. So how on earth did this happen? How did a simple fog become one of the deadliest environmental disasters in modern history? Well, that's exactly what we're here to find out. All right, so to really get our heads around this, we have to go back. We need to reconstruct the scene of the crime. We have to try and understand what it was like to be on the streets, to be breathing that air during those 5 terrifying days when London literally went blind. And, the scary part is how fast it all happened. It starts on Friday, December 5th, when a weather system called an anticyclone basically puts a giant lid over the city. By Saturday, London's in this weird, permanent twilight. Visibility is practically zero. By Sunday, the killer has moved indoors. And by Monday, all the systems that keep a modern city alive, they just completely failed. But honestly, just looking at a timeline doesn't even begin to cover what it felt like to actually be there. I mean, just look at this. This was a full-on assault on your senses. It wasn't just about what you couldn't see. It was what you tasted, what you felt, what you heard. People who were there talked about this nasty, metallic taste in the air, a greasy black film that settled on everything, making sidewalks slick and treacherous. And the sound. The usual roar of London just vanished. It was replaced by this eerie, muffled quiet, only broken by shouting or the sudden bang of detonators on railway lines. That was the only way to warn train drivers they were near a signal they couldn't see. And just try to picture this. The city's transport network. Its very lifeblood. It just stopped. Bus drivers couldn't even see the curb. The only way some buses could move was by having a conductor walk in front of the vehicle, holding a lit flare, just to find their way through the streets. All traffic on the river halted. Eventually, even the ambulance service had to stop running, leaving sick and dying people completely stranded. The entire city was just paralyzed. Okay, but maybe the most terrifying thing about this smog was that you couldn't escape it. It didn't stay outside. It seeped right through window frames and under doorways. This wasn't just bad weather, it was a home invasion. Get this. At the Sadler's Wells Theater, they had to stop a performance of an opera midway through, not because of the performers, but because the fog inside the theater got so thick, the audience literally couldn't see the stage anymore. Absolutely nowhere was safe. So, okay, we've established the scene, a city under attack. But here's the thing. This wasn't a natural disaster. Not really. This was manufactured. So now our investigation pivots from the what to the why. What were the decisions, the economic pressures, the straight-up system failures that set the stage for this catastrophe? In the first clue, it's all about the coal. See, in post-war Britain, their best high-quality coal was like gold. It was mined and then immediately shipped overseas to help pay off massive war debts. So what were Londoners left with to heat their own homes? They got stuck with this stuff, nutty slack. And it was exactly what it sounds like. It was the dregs, low grade, full of impurities like sulfur, and it burned with this thick, nasty, acrid smoke. Millions of homes were unknowingly pumping pure poison into their own air. And here's the real kicker, the tragic irony of it all. The government wasn't just selling this dirty fuel. They were actively marketing it as a patriotic duty. Slogans like this one encouraged people to burn more and more of this nutty slack to help the country recover from the war. They were being told they were helping to rebuild Britain, when in reality, they were loading the gun that was pointed right at their own city. But it wasn't just this nutty slack coal, right? It wasn't the lone gunman. There was a whole crew of accomplices. You had the desperate post-war economy demanding exports at any cost. You had massive power stations, like the famous Battersea, burning thousands of tons of coal right in the middle of the city. You had millions of homes with old-fashioned open fireplaces. And to top it all off, London had just ripped out its clean electric tram system and replaced it with a whole new fleet of diesel buses, adding this greasy, ground-level layer of pollution to the toxic mix. All right, so we've got our suspects lined up. Now we got to look at the murder weapon itself. How did a simple mix of smoke and fog become a chemical agent capable of killing thousands of people? Well, the answer lies in a deadly cocktail of meteorology and chemistry. So, it all kicks off with something called a temperature inversion. Normally, the warm, polluted air from a city rises up and blows away. But on December 5th, a layer of warm air settled high above London, trapping the colder air down below. This created a sealed dome over the city. Every single puff of smoke from every chimney, every factory, every bus, it had nowhere to go. It would just hit this invisible ceiling and get pushed right back down onto the streets. And inside that toxic dome, a really simple but really deadly chemical reaction was happening. So, step 1, that sulfur-rich nutty slack coal releases huge amounts of sulfur dioxide gas. Step 2, this gas mixes with all the water droplets in the thick fog. Step 3, all the other gunk in the air, soot from coal, exhaust from diesel buses, it acts as a catalyst, and it converts that whole mixture into tiny, airborne droplets of pure sulfuric acid. People weren't just breathing in smoke. They were literally inhaling a fine mist of acid. And you know who the first victims were? They weren't even human. They were the prized cattle on display at an agricultural show in Smithfield. Now, these were some of the healthiest, strongest animals in the entire country, but their huge lungs made them incredibly vulnerable. They just started suffocating in their pens. You had breeders desperately trying to save them, even making these improvised gas masks out of sacks soaked in whiskey. But it was completely useless. And when they did autopsies on these poor animals, what they found was a terrifying warning shot. Their lungs were black, filled with tar, and showed all the signs of acute chemical damage. This was a clear biological preview of what that acid fog was doing to the 8 million people breathing it just outside. Those animals, they were the canaries in London's coal mine. And that warning shot? Well, this is what it looked like on the human side. A nurse named Maureen Scholes described absolutely apocalyptic scenes in the hospitals. The smog was so thick indoors you couldn't even see from one end of a hospital ward to the other. And the patients who were flooding in all had the same terrifying symptom, cyanosis. Their skin, their lips were turning blue. It's a classic sign of oxygen starvation. The acid had so inflamed their lungs they were suffocating, even while they were desperately gasping for breath. So, on December 9th, the weather finally changed and the fog lifted. But the disaster? Oh, it was far from over. Our investigation now has to turn to the aftermath, the cover-up, the fight for the truth, and the deep, lasting legacy of those 5 dark days. Right away, a battle started over the real body count. The government, which was led by Winston Churchill at the time, initially admitted to 4,000 deaths. A horrific number for sure, but one they tried to frame as just a tragic freak of nature. But look at this chart. Modern science has gone back and re-examined all the data, and the real number is closer to 12,000. I mean, that's a massive gap. So what happened to those other 8,000 people? Well, they were basically hidden, covered up by a convenient but totally false story. For months after the smog, the death rate in London stayed incredibly high. So the government's explanation was a sudden, severe influenza epidemic. And politically, it was a brilliant move. Say, if it was the flu, well, that's just an act of God, right? But if it was the pollution, well, then it was the government's fault. But later studies proved it. There was no flu epidemic. These were delayed deaths, all caused by the smog. But the public wasn't having it. The outrage was just too huge, and it forced the government to act. And what came out of it was the Clean Air Act of 1956, which was, honestly, a revolutionary piece of environmental law. It created these smokeless zones. It forced industry to build taller chimneys to disperse pollution. And, this is key, it gave homeowners grants to help them switch from those dirty coal fires to cleaner gas or electric heat. It was the beginning of the end for the classic London pea souper fog. And this really brings us to the long shadow that this smog still casts today. Just look at this comparison. The killer back in '52, it was obvious, it was visible, a thick, choking soot from coal fires that killed you fast. Today's killer, which mainly comes from road transport, like diesel vehicles, is invisible. We can't see nitrogen dioxide or tiny PM2.5 particles. And it doesn't kill you in 5 days. It kills you slowly, over decades, through things like asthma, cancer, and heart disease. The threat has just changed form, from visible to invisible. So, what's the big takeaway from all this? The lesson of the Great Smog seems to be pretty clear. When a threat is visible, when it's tangible and terrifying enough, we are capable of taking radical, meaningful action. They banned the fuel, they changed their homes, and they cleaned the air. So, the question this whole story leaves us with is, do we have what it takes to fight a killer we can't even see?